Okay. Um, I don't really feel ready to do this Bodhisattva Breakfast Corner because I'm very much in process. But Venerable asked me if I would share, and so I'm going to. But I want a disclaimer from the beginning because I think something quite, well, a huge part of my identity is being um, agitated from the inside out. Not because of why you think you'll have nice smiles. Um, I grew up in Atlanta, as you well know. Um, Generation upon generation upon generation of Southern people, my background. And it was something I was raised to be very proud of. Um, we had, I don't know who has it now, but for a long time, my mother had the last piece of china that my great, great, great grandmother buried under the stoop when the Yankees came through and burned our cities, destroyed the land because they took everything. So, the Southern pride I grew up with was very much, it was like a huge part of our culture. We were proud of our Civil War cadets. I don't think we had any generals. But nobody was proud because we defended slavery. There was something about a pride of defending our land, defending our rights, defending our people from the pretty major decimation of that particular region of the South. Atlanta was burned pretty much to the ground. And so, in some ways, I think there was this sense, I really recognized this when I went to Europe for the first time. It's like, oh, this is what a defeated people feel like. On this country, on this soil, a people who were defeated have this kind of claiming their history. Although when you go to Germany, those people also were defeated. They're not clinging to their history. In fact, the people I knew from my generation were like so trying to distance themselves from their grandparents, and they wouldn't sing the folk songs of their country, you know. So it's a different attitude. This was very much kind of claiming it. But we never were raised on, yes, we're fighting for slavery. That was not in any way, shape, or form a part of what we were trained with, right? Didn't come up. I wrote a song many years ago, and the first verse goes like this. After a thunderstorm, the streets run deep red with clay leached from the hills and the blood of Confederate dead, and of every man who ever swung from a lynching party's rope, and of every woman worked to death without a ray of hope. And that to me is the South. The Confederate dead are, when I was growing up, still vivid. It's also true that the dirt is red, so that when it rains, red clay does run through the streets like red rivers. It was also true when I was growing up that we knew about lynching parties and were horrified and ashamed. It wasn't something that was condoned or rejoiced at in my family. It was like, completely distanced from, this is an outrageous thing that happens. And of course, when I wrote the line, women work to death without a ray of hope, I was talking of women of both black and white. Because there's a whole other thing about identities in the South. So so then Venerable Children sent me a New York Times thing the other day, and she says, as daughter of a South, I wonder how you take this. So the writer of this particular article is Clay Risen. He says, as a son of the South, I'm glad to see folks finally getting their act together on the hundreds of Confederate monuments spread throughout the region. But I also know that these monuments, taken as a whole, are themselves low-hanging fruit. What he means is, we can take down the monuments, but that's not the problem. There are other arguments here. I went and looked up Andrew Young, who was a mayor of Atlanta, the first African American, one of the first African American elected from Georgia to the House of Representatives. A really fine statesman and leader. Andrew Young's, and I grew up in the shadow of Stone Mountain. Well, first I grew up in Little Five Points, where the railroad was blown up. You could still find nails from the blowing up of that railroad during the Battle of Atlanta. You could still find battle insignia by digging in the dirt. My mother grew up in the same part of town, so she, as a little girl, dug all that stuff up and like saved it and collected it. It was like just part of who we were. Right? So then, when we moved from downtown, from that place where there's a historical marker on every corner, that's not an exaggeration in that particular part of town. Then I moved out to the suburbs where we lived in the shadow of Stone Mountain, where carved into the granite is General Lee, and I don't even know who else is still up there. Stonewall Jackson, 4 guys. Just part of the mountain. We didn't think too much about it. It's just the heritage, right? So Andrew Young says it's too costly to refight the Civil War. We have paid too great a price in trying to bring people together. I personally feel that we make a mistake in fighting over the Confederate flag here in Georgia. And then he talks about how much it cost them, that fight. $14.9 billion and 70,000 jobs that would have gone to the Affordable Care Act. I'm always interested in substance over symbols, he says. And I remember last year when we were witnessing and processing that horrible murder of the 9 people in Columbia, South Carolina. And there was this huge celebration that the Republican governor of South Carolina finally took down the Confederate flag from the State House. It's like, yes, but this is not the solution, folks. The flag is just an old piece of cloth. Those statues have been standing up there since 1920 or 1890 or whichever wave of art they got put up. They are ubiquitous. Even this other guy who Venerable sent me another article today, they've just always been there. You never ask the question. Taking them down won't hurt anything. Symbolically, maybe it will help, but that is not the problem. That is not the problem. The problem is, as this writer from today, he says that we're at the white nationalist movement now has the people who say, I'm not racist, but. The people I grew up with, you would also say, I'm not racist. But it was a genteel kind of racism that was always polite, kind even, considerate, wanting to help, and always one up. Always, always, always. And no matter how much I might confront my own family, and I did, that was so deeply ingrained in the culture that they honestly couldn't understand what I was talking about. So what I'm processing now is, okay, I'm a Southern expatriate. I have not lived there since 1977. I still am deeply connected to that culture. And in part because I was raised by my grandparents and my great-grandparents, I have a whole kind of historical embodiment of a South that does not exist anymore. Today, Atlanta, I know, is a mecca for Black professionals as a place where it's really a place where they can thrive. A lot of people are going there. So I'm not even talking about I'm not sure that I'm even talking about what's true today. But what I'm sharing is my own internal processing of having been raised with so much pride about being Southern. And Southern is also not the point. You can't just say that, what do I want to say about that? What I want to say is that I have to re-examine my own conditioning and my own understanding. I have to re-examine how come those statues don't cross my mind. just because I live with them my whole life. I have to examine how much my polite, genteel racism, how much that's in there. That's what I have to talk about. I listened to a talk just a couple of days ago by Michael Eric Dyson, really powerful speaker who was speaking about white privilege. And he pointed out, he said, so listen, when you say gender issue, what comes to your mind? Women. We don't think men. When you say racial issue, what comes to your mind? Blacks. We don't think white. He said, you need to claim your whiteness. We need to look at what that means. How do we hold it? How do we hold it in regard to everything else around us? So, yeah. So this is totally kind of unformulated. I haven't come to conclusions and decisions. What I have come to conclude is that if I don't want to be any part of the kind of demonstrations that happened in Charlottesville last year, I can't just go, that's not me. I don't believe in this. I think this is reprehensible. I want to denounce this. That's not good enough, I think, anymore. I have to look inside and go, okay, what is my history with this? Where do I really sit? Where am I loyal to my family? Where am I still willing to go to the graves of my great-great-grandparents outside the Stonewall Church in Fairburn, Georgia? I know where they are. We used to go give them flowers. We would go clean off the graves. There are many Confederate graves there. That feeling of home and connection, it's like, that's all a part of who I am. So what part of me is just who I am? What part of me is just that conditioning? And what part of that conditioning have I, as a white, Buddhist, liberal, gay person who's been working against that kind of prejudice my whole life, what part is not digested in me? And where do I still contribute? So, I don't know. I'm giving this here because I think as far as the Dharma is concerned, I mean, like, how do we make this a Dharma talk and not a political talk? I think the power of conditioning is so easy to overlook. We are conditioned from conception and before. But in this life, we are conditioned from conception. It's kind of a joke that my mother was eating cornbread and buttermilk when I was in her womb. But that's a fact. She was. And cornbread and buttermilk is still a comfort food. And maybe it always will be, and that's okay. I also don't want to deny and denounce that. But what I have to look at is, what does that conditioning do with my unconscious behaviors? What does that conditioning do with how I see the world? What does that conditioning do in terms of how I want to be able to develop an uncontrived bodhicitta that absolutely holds every single living being equally? Those so outrageously sad young men shouting those things that they were shouting. Fresh-faced boys, I kept thinking, my God, these guys are children. But they're not. They're big, they're strong, and they're burly. They can do a lot of harm. And they're also confused, in my view. There's another thing that's out, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger has a great video out about terminating white supremacy and saying to these guys, being Nazi is not cool. I grew up in Austria in 1937. It's brilliant. And he said, those Nazis are not great, tough guys. When they came back, they were broken for life. They were broken for life. So to me, and it's really been my whole relationship with the South, that's what that whole song is about. So much suffering. So much suffering over war, so much suffering over enslavement, so much suffering over identities and people not living up to who they think they should be or who people think they should. I mean, Probably I'm a Buddhist because I'm a child of self. No question about it. But as this wound is, which has never gone away in our country, ever, 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 as this wound is like now coming to the surface and broken open in such a huge way. Our friend Cheryl, I wrote to her the other day, I said, gosh, I want to talk to you about this. She said, I am not surprised. She's been saying this all along. She's not surprised. It's my little liberal skimming over, oh, things are way better. And I will say, we had 8 years of a black president. Celebrate this, and this is the aftermath. I mean, we all own this. So, anyway, my concern was that these are not well-formed thoughts. I am not a scholar. I'm not a sociologist. I cannot speak in kind of like broad global ways, which is a little more comfortable for me. But, but to own that I and my family and my history and everything I come from is a part of the pain of our country. And I personally need to know what's mine, what's not mine, and what I can do as a practitioner, what I can do as a Buddhist nun, what I can do as someone who is committed to healing and transforming on every level, and have been for most of my life. What I can do now to bring healing to a situation. So.
The article I sent you today from the New York Times saying what the white supremacists get right about American history really opened my eyes, and how white supremacy is just built into the country from the very get-go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was, and how Trump's comments last week really reinforced that, by saying, well, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are big American heroes who said, everybody's created equal. What are we going to do now? Take their things down. Of course, everybody's going to say, oh, no, they're our heroes. But they were also white supremacists. It was very clear from Jefferson's writings.
Yeah.
And how, how difficult that is for people to acknowledge, that right from the very get-go of the formation of this country, there was white supremacy embedded in everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just in the fact all men are created equal, there you have it. Women are left out. Blacks are left out. So many people are left out. And yet, as children, we heard that and we said, oh, that's good. But without realizing what was really behind it.
Yeah. And Andrew Young said in his comments too, he said, the Confederate flag stands for one thing, but he said this Stars and Stripes has flown over just as much hatred, just as much destruction as the Confederates. So there's a misconnection there in laying it all in one place. We all own it. We all own it.
Having said that, you were talking a lot about identity, and I think you also have to see the conditioning and then come to the point where it's all conditioning and none of that is you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important point to come to.
Thank you. It is an important point.
Yeah.
Greetings, Venerable. Personally, me and my people, we had endured a lot of racism, and I endured most of my suffering was due to racism. And I feel like in this country they portray everything as black and white, but there's many other ethnic groups, Native Americans, Asians, and Latinos, who have also endured struggles, and these struggles are often invisible. In addition to, often it's concentrated only on white supremacy, but from me, I've seen a lot of the worst racism is other minorities against other minorities. and also self-hatred and racism,
Mm.
and also viewing oneself as a victim. And for me, studying the Dharma showed me that I'm not a victim of racism, even though I endured a lot of oppression. And in my view too, like you said about the U.S. flag, for example, to many indigenous peoples, I mean peoples around the world, the Stars and Stripes represents genocide.
Yeah.
But that does not end the cross. Even the cross represents genocide to many peoples around the world, the crucifix. But that does not mean that we should ban or burn all those symbols because that's part of history. And I feel that groups that went to protest, of course, the racists, what they did is absolutely wrong. But I feel that even the counter protesters, the way they reacted to the symbols with emotions and not logic, is very dangerous because they fell right into that trap. I don't think they should get so emotional over a statue like that and get involved in it. Like many of the venerables have said here, they should use different tactics, non-violent methods. But I know from people that feel that they are a victim, often they do resort to violence instead of going to another route. I believe a non-violent method is much better than pursuing violence. Because a lot of times, even if you look at armed groups that are fighting, they claim they're fighting for freedom. But when they get in power, they get corrupted too. And they begin oppressing the people the same way. And they use armed violence. So true resistance cannot be with weapons and killing, because that will create more suffering and more bloodshed. And it will also create a cycle of vengeance. Somebody will kill, then they will keep on killing each other. So it cannot be defeated that way. That is my view. And only the Dharma has helped me to overcome racial oppression and through nonviolence.
So, as an immigrant, I've also encountered instances of definitely racism in different ways. Some more subtle, others more overt. But I always have thought and have felt quite fortunate to have come to this country. Certainly, this issue has to be addressed, and I think it's up to all of us to do that. But in doing that, I don't want us to lose the beauty of this country and what it represents, and the kindness of the people here. Having come from poverty, coming here with nothing, we found so much beauty, and we found people who helped and encouraged. And the fact that we made it through, that we came through that in a very beautiful way, I think, is testament to the fact that there's been more kindness than hate. That there have been more people willing to help than to oppress. And so I would say not to lose hope and not to look at the country with eyes of pessimism, but rather to recognize that there is kindness and love and beauty and acceptance, even in the face of this uprising of hate. And I am grateful for all that I have found here and received here. And my hope is to continue to contribute to this country in whatever way I can, because it has given me so much. Not just materially, but also I found the Dharma here. I found education here. Um, I found friendship. I found understanding. And to me, that's very valuable. Thank you.
The hook to that song is second verse. The ghosts of North Georgia have been whispering in my ear. My grandma humming Baptist hymns while Daddy pops a beer. My old great maid, Great Aunt Noki, with her sad and lonely life. My aunts and cousins want one thing, to be somebody's wife. And you could not have told me 20 years ago that this southern expatriate would miss her Magnolia country so.